All right, so let's talk about UI. And then for UI, there are actually two major things we need to learn. Number one, how do we lay out stuff? So basically, how do we align things in a row, in the columns? That's the first thing you need to know how to do it, because the component part is pretty easy. You see the button, you see the drop-down menus, all of those you can drag and drop, you can do it, or you can choose the type. That's not hard to learn. But the difficult part is once you have all of this, how can you put them together in the kind of good layout you want to be? All right, so there are a lot of techniques you should do. And then after that, we'll go to the individual widget or component, like how do we use button? We'll show you some of the examples, but there may be other interesting you can do. Or how do we use, for example, radio group button? We have checkboxes, we have image views. There are so many of those. So we cannot cover every detail, during a couple lectures, but I can, based on my own experience, because as you start to do the Android development, you will find out you're going to repeat most of these things again and again. So I'm going to focus on this most important, most useful, and practical aspects about UI. Hopefully that's going to give you a very good foundation for you to make your own app. All right. So I don't have to really emphasize this, but the user experience, user interface is just so important today, especially after this whole iPhone concept and all the apps. When people see Apple, they put how much efforts to the user experience UI design. It just revolutionarily changed the way people deal with software interface. Previously, most companies didn't pay much attention to the UI and the UX design, but nowadays every small company, big company, startup company, they start to have a dedicated UI designer, graphic designer. So that's a big trend, because anything, the UI is what the customer will see at first place. In many cases, if we don't feel that your UI is professional, we're not going to download it. We're not going to try it. So everyone understands that's very important, and even more important than the technology, because for the customers, they don't really care about what kind of technology you actually use. They don't care about how efficient your algorithm is. They just care about, when I start to use the app, does the app actually works smoothly? Does the app has a very nice experience and interaction? Does the app does something I want to do in a very easy and a small amount of steps? So that's what the user cares about. So designing the user experience well is very, very important. All right. And then for any UI system, you really think about, first of all, you need to know the kind of components you need. Like in this Gmail app, we have all this rows. Every row we have email record that shows a little icon, shows some text, the title, everything. And then we have at the top some menu buttons and options there. And then, of course, you can also do a lot of interactions by swiping, click on this, and open something. That's one aspect. And another aspect is how do you lay out stuff. So if I gave you all these icons, I gave you all these rows, how can I make sure that this one actually shows up in the list? And then those little icons show at the top that they're horizontally arranged. So all of this needs some kind of a work and implementation. And same thing, this is kind of one older version of Facebook. I don't know. It still looks similar, but I guess on the menu, everything has been changed a lot. But then they have this kind of a sliding drawer menu bar. And then you also have the news feed. But for every screen, you should think about what are the elements you need. Images, text, some of the little buttons, and how do you lay out them. All right. And Uber, this is probably one of the earliest version of Uber app, that you have a map view in the middle, and then you have other things at top and bottom. You can actually look at your receipt, give the reviews, give the ratings, and all of this. Again, we have to know how do we use little images, how do we provide this rating bar. These are all available from Android. But the challenging part is always, once I give all of this, how do you make sure that this one's at the bottom, centered, and then this one is centered right here. So we showed you a little bit as we make other examples, but today, focusing on the layout, that's our first step. This is the Airbnb app. I don't really use this very often, but if you take a look at this app, especially Airbnb and Uber, these are the apps probably has the most resource in terms of designers, development. So they're like very technically competitive. They pretty much can do whatever they want. And also, this company, they're not as big as Google, but they only focus on the mobile app. So if you look at their apps, pretty much you can find out the most advanced, mobile features and design, the trend, and everything there. So I highly recommend you take a look at Airbnb and Uber app, and they're pretty much leading the whole industry trend on design, on user experience. All right. So to kind of repeat what I have told you, when we talk about UI, two components or two things to do. The widgets you need to use, buttons, menus, images, and then the layout. How do you put them together? All right. And then in Android, you're going to use all these different classes to represent both. For example, for layout, you have specific classes, specific type of layout for you to arrange your widget. You have something called linear layout parameters, those kind of classes that's for you to configure your layout. But then at the same time, you also have other classes like views to help you to create those concrete widgets. So we're going to go to the example shortly so that you will see how that works. Now back to this example we did last time. So we have this text here. If you remember, we use something called a text view. It's a very typical one you will use to show some text through some string, or it's something like a label. And also we use 3 buttons to show the true false buttons, to show the next buttons. And then you also remember we actually did something to make all of this shown in the center of the screen. So you had to change some of the properties. If you remember, we use something called gravity. I put the gravity center. Also use something called a layout gravity. So those are the ones you need to use to help you to kind of configure this layout. But then you should understand that once we finish a layout, it basically gave you a kind of a tree type of structure. So for any layout, there should be some kind of a parent that includes everything. So it should always start from the whole screen. We have a parent, and then the parent will contain some child views, and then the view could be either a specific widget or it could be a specific layout. So I'll come back to this to talk more about this, but you should from now on to know that for any given view, it's kind of like a tree, right? From the parent, which is the screen, you can find out the element you include and contain inside the view, and then there could be other like subgroups that contains other multiple widgets. You will start to see that shortly. All right, that's just what I mentioned. So you have some kind of groups that can contain other groups or view, or you have individual views that just represent specific view or element. All right. Just like this one, to use this one as an example, if you have 2 buttons here, and then you have all the 4 checkboxes. So first thing you need to do is create those 6 elements, 2 buttons and 4 checkboxes. And after that, you also need to lay out them. When you lay out them, you need to put them into the right group, and then eventually put them in the one single parent class. In this case, we use something called relative layout. So eventually, this relative layout actually contains these 2 layouts, linear layout and then table layout. Linear layout has 2 buttons inside, and then the table layout has 2 rows, and then every row you have 2 checkboxes. All right. So whenever you see a UI from now on, you should realize that's not just only this visual component. There are a lot of the layout behind it to make them show up at that position. So the layout part is more difficult to learn than individual widgets, because that needs some experience. I'm going to talk some of those. How do we center things? How do we give the margins? And then there's another thing called paddings. How do we give those? When do we use margin? When do we use padding? So there's a lot of experience to learn about those layouts. All right, and the same idea here. So if you have that kind of layout, then you should know the parent is just that parent relative layout, and that contains the table layout, the linear layout. This one has 2 buttons. That one has the 2 table rows. Every table row has 2 checkboxes. So any UI view, you can actually draw a tree for it. All right. Now the reason to do this is it's actually a very good kind of way to manage all the components, because now they're actually associated with each other. from the parent, you can actually track and iterate all the individual child views. It can make some of the operations a lot easier to do. And then this actually apply a design principle, a design pattern, which we'll cover in another class, 356 class. It's called a composite pattern. So we'll talk about that in another class, but for now, don't worry about it. So there is a reason behind it to organize the whole thing at the tree. It's a very good design practice. All right, so let's start something very concrete. I'm going to start talking about the linear layout. All right, so let me create a new project. Let me also open my Genymotion. All right, so I'm going to start a new project. And also I have checking all the code into that GitHub repository. You should be able to find it in the Blackboard. So I'll do a lesson 2, which is the layout UI demo. And I will always use that empty activity, so that's easier for us to see all the changes we have made. All right, at the same time, I'm going to open the Genymotion. All right, now again, kind of a quick review on what we talked about last week. So you can, you have a project open, then you are going to work on 4 components. Gradle is the one you don't touch very often. Whenever you need to change the version name, version number, and dependency, you go there. Manifest file also you don't touch it very often. It's a metadata file. Whenever you create a new activity in your screen, you will need it. Most of the time, we start to work on the resource first, and most of the time it's actually layout file, this one. And then after that, we'll go to the Java code to make changes. All right, so today we're going to focus more on the layout. When you open the layout file, okay, so it's something called XML file. I already told you that let's try not use the visual editor. Let's come back to the text editor to do the editing, because you will learn exactly what each property work, the purpose, and also how to make changes and adjust different details. So in the future, you will that helps you to truly understand some of the little tricky properties. Otherwise, if you just use this editor, you don't know exactly how it works. All right. Now, first of all, in Android, let's start to Google like Android layout. Now, you should know that Android actually has a lot of layouts. So let's see if I can find a list of possible layouts. All right. So here give you some examples. Common layout, you have a linear, relative, web view, and then you have list view, grid view. That only shows a few of those. There are actually more layout added in the later version of Android. So for example, you might already see this thing called constraint layout. Right? This is something they added new in Android 5 or maybe even newer version. Didn't have the constraint layout before in Android 4, 3, or 2. This one, the primary purpose of adding this one is actually to work with this visual editor. So that actually it's easier to work with the visual editor. So that's why I'm not going to talk too much about this. This is not really recommended to use for now, because you're going to basically too much rely on this visual editor. You don't know how to do it without it. And also I can tell you, this one can give you a quick, easy layout, but if you want to go detail, make very nice and precise changes, you can't just rely on this one. You have to go back to the code anyway. So let's forget about it. And also that's why I wouldn't recommend you to use the constraint layout, because the primary focus is to have to use this one in the visual editor. but I want you to learn more basic ones. All right, the most important layout you should learn how to do is that linear layout. Okay, I would consider that the most important one because you can pretty much use layout. Sorry about that. The linear layout to do anything. All right. Even though you have other layout, but in my opinion, linear layout that's the most powerful one and most generic one. But of course, some cases linear layout can, there are better options than linear layout to do things. But I will show you that. So, but today I will focus a lot on the linear layout. So let's start from scratch. Okay, I'm gonna close this one. I'm not gonna touch that, but I'm gonna show you a new one. So this is normally how you create a brand new resource file for the layout. So go to the layout resource file, give a name, and normally you should follow the convention activity underscore and your activity name. So call it main. But we already have a main, so I will call it a main2. Click on OK. And then it's going to ask you this root element. All right. So as I told you, I would recommend that we use something called the linear layout. All right. Let me see if I can change it here. No, that's the wrong name. So the linear layout should be this, I guess. Actually, no. Let me just do this. All right. So let's change the whole thing back to linear layout. All right. So that's the first thing to do. Don't use that constraint. All right. So it's not a very good way to do things. We only focus on the layout, the linear layout right now. So the layout, any layout is not visible because all it does is try to arrange and align your elements. So you don't expect to see them, although you can see them by decorating some of the background and getting some of the borders. All right. Now, for any of the layout stuff, there are certain things you have to do first. Now, number one is that width. Number two is that height. All right. So any view element, layout, or some other things, you must specify width and height because that's pretty much the first thing you need to do to specify the size and dimension for anything in the UI. Without telling that, then Android don't know what to do next. You have to fix the size first, and then you do the decoration, you change the style later on. All right, so always start with the width and height. And for width and height, it's pretty easy to do. Well, first of all, you will see most of the time you have something called a match parent. Well, pretty easy to understand. Basically saying that for this UI element, the width should be as wide as its parent. And then you need to ask yourself, what is your parent? Well, the parent is screen. Very good. So that basically means, this layout is going to take the whole screen, the whole width of the screen. And the same thing for the height. All right. So if you do match parent, then it's going to be as high as your screen. Now I can do a little experiment. For example, right now this is Nexus 4. So if I change it to this one, Pixel 2 phone, all right, this will be a lot higher and wider. So if I change that phone, as you can see, it's a different dimension, but it doesn't matter. This layout still fits perfectly for the whole screen of the phone. So that's how the match parent and match for width and height works. Okay, I'm going to come back to the Android. What did I use? 5.0. Yeah, I'm going to use 5. Doesn't matter too much. All right. So width and height, you can do it. There are other options, so we'll show you later. And then another thing for linear layout you should know is everything you put in a layout will be aligned or arranged one by one. That's why it's called linear. But then you have two options. You can either do it horizontally or vertically. But you can only choose one of them. And then if you choose one, and then everything contained will be aligned in that direction. All right. So let's start to adding, before you see that, let's start add two buttons first. So I'm going to add a button. And again, then just should try to use match parent. And I'm going to put the text here. And then the button, we want to show, for example, just button 1, something very simple. That's going to be the text. All right, so I just finished adding a new button. But now when you see the button, first of all, the width and the height. All right, so since I choose match parent, this kind of better shows you the idea. Now the width and the height will be as wide as its parent, and then in this case, the button has been placed inside this linear layout. So linear layout, that's the parent. So whatever width and height you have in linear layout, your button will be. So that's why this whole button takes a whole spring. So if you want to make it shorter and lower, so there are different ways to do it, and then you can. First of all, for the height, instead of going with the match parent, you can do something called wrap content. Alright, so if you just type W, it will pop up this option for you. Now, if you do the wrap content, it's quite different because right now the button is a lot shorter. The way it works is it tries to provide you the enough height or width to wrap the content you need. In this case, how do I determine the content for my button? It really determined by this text you put on top of the button. Like if I see here you have button 1, this text, and then I want to figure out the enough height for you to show this text. And of course, with some little bit margin here so that it looks nice. So when you do wrap content, it basically asks Android to figure out an automatic way to give you the amount of height or width as you need. So this is actually a very smart and automatic way to give the dimension. So for example, let's also change the width. Right now it's match parent, taking the whole width. But if I change that into wrap content, let's see what happens. If I do that, and then the button got a lot smaller. The reason is Android knows that to display this button 1, these characters, that's the width we need. So it automatically adjusts it for you. So we can do experiment. I can do button 1, this is a long and wide button. As I'm typing the text, I'm increasing the length of my text. The width also got increased accordingly, automatically, because I'm actually saying I want to wrap this content automatically. So that's what Android will do for you. So that's pretty much the difference between wrap content and match parent. So if you want this one to be always wide, so you can do the match parent. So it doesn't matter what you put there. I can just delete some of the text; it remain the same size. Or I can do a more smarter way, which is wrap content. All right, either way works depending on what you need. All right, but those two options, the first option you will start with. Right, so we'll talk about other options later. Okay, so for now I'm going to use just a wrap content. Button 1, just a small button. And then I can add another button, my second button. And this one is button 2, and then wrap content same. Alright, so let's start with these two buttons. But coming back, I want to talk about how the linear layout works. As you can see right now, the linear layout has started to work. Because when you put these two buttons right here, you see this one is actually behind button 1, and then they are in the same row. And then if I start to add another one, button 3, you will see, now this button will show after button 2 still in the same row. Right? So the reason they do this is because all these buttons are included in the linear layout. And linear layout has the power to arrange things in a row or in a column, depending on how you want to do it. But once you put them into the linear layout, they will be show up one by one. It's just a matter of the direction or orientation. So you might be asking, how do I change this into a column vertically? Well, pretty simple. So you want to configure something in the linear layout. So I want you to go here and then add another property called orientation. You don't have to type the whole thing. If you just type the orientation, a few letters, they're going to give you this suggestion. And then you can see there you have two options to specify for your linear layout, either vertical or horizontal. So if I do horizontal, that's what we have right now. So it looks like by default you got a horizontal kind of orientation. So everything will be aligned in the same row horizontally. But if I change this one into vertical, let's see what happens. If I do this, all right, then your buttons goes vertically, and then they will be placed row by row in the same column. And it doesn't matter how wide your button is. For example, the middle button get wider, while they're still being placed in the same vertical column, because linear layout tells them to do this. Or this button, I want to do a kind of match parent, very white. It doesn't matter. This one still shows at the last one. All right. So orientation, you have to specify it for all of the linear layout, either vertical or horizontal, just one of the two options. So now if I change it back to horizontal, okay, so that's how it works. This one wrap content, this one wrap content gave you enough space, and then for button 3, you're running out of space, and then even though you said it's match parent, but then the other two already take most of the space in the parent, so that's the only space you have. So they tried its best to give you some space, but as you can see, the text actually wrapped into a new line because you're running out of space. But once I start to reduce the content here, this one is going to take over because this one tries to match parent. All right, they're trying to sharing all the spaces available from the same row. All right, so this is called orientation, horizontal or vertical. For any linear layout, the first thing you need to do is the dimension, width and height. The second one would be the orientation, either vertical or horizontal. All right. Any questions? All right, so let's make some more concrete examples. Okay, find some more interesting examples. So this one, we're trying to give you a kind of like email view for you to create. Like you have a edit box there. You can type the recipient. You can then type the subject, and then you have the whole message box to type more messages, and then you have a button to send it. All right, so let's see how to make it. So this one, when you look at the layout, it's a pretty typical vertical linear arrangement because of 4 elements. They're placed in 4 different rows, one after another. So it's a perfect time to use linear layout. All right, so I only need one button, so I'm going to get rid of the other 2 buttons. Just one button here called send. And also I'm going to do the wrap content, try to make it as, kind of similar to this one. And then before that, I need 3 things for me to type the actual characters. So if you want to edit something, normally we use something called edit text. That's the one for you to input things into a box. And as you can see, once you create this new element, Android Studio asks you immediately to provide the height and weight. So that's always the case. All right. So for this one, if you look at the design here, it looks like we need to basically make this one as wide as possible. So probably I'm going to go with match parent. All right. For the height, and well, looks like I just need something to wrap it. Probably just one line is enough. I'm going to do the wrap content. Once I place this element, as you can see, that is the edit text. Basically, one box that you can click and then type all the things using the keyboard. All right. And then, of course, we also want to show some text here. For example, that display a 2 to give you some kind of a suggestion that you should type the recipient. So in the edit text, you can do that. So there is one property. We'll talk more about this, something called a hint. So the hint will be the text that's going to be displayed before you're typing things. For example, I can do a hint of 2. Then you're going to see that little character here so that people know what they're supposed to type. All right, to do the same, I'm going to add another edit text. After it, this time is for the subject. So it looks like same width and height. So match parent and then wrap content. So I got one more. And then let's also add a hint, which is a subject. But the interesting part, you can see every time when I add one more edit text, they are being placed one after another, below another. Because I'm using a linear layout, the linear layout helps to arrange them one by one vertically, because I specify the orientation to be vertical. So that's how it works. So I can add one more edit text, match parent, wrap content. This one, the hint is going to be a message. All right, so right here, you see there's a message. But then this one, it's different from the first two because this one we want more space to type longer message. So maybe we can take the whole space. So there are different we can try it. So maybe for the height, instead of wrap parent content, we can do a match parent. All right. So that's one option. But then as you can see, if you do this one, it's not really too good because that little button is kind of gone because you're trying to take the whole space. That's actually not what we want. So you can't really do match parent. And then that actually gave you leads us to another kind of topic here. Let's talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so you will need to know that. For now, I'm going to do a wrap content, but I'm going to come back here to explain how we can do other things. All right, like to make the message box bigger, but without hiding the button. For now, I just want to show you the actual linear layout, how the linear layout works. So basically, once you put them vertical, this is going to look like this. All right. All right, so let me go through some of the detailed properties. I already talked about the difference between wrap content and match parent. This is the easiest one you can understand, but also this is the most frequently used properties. Any widget, you probably want to go with either one of this, right? Depending on if you want to be the whole width or just some kind of a length based on the content. So this one is pretty easy to understand. But also you can specify some of the spaces or margins, or we also have something called paddings for your element. All right, so what does that mean? So for example, let's come back to the app here. This is currently what the UI looks like. Okay, pretty nice, and clean. So if you look at my design here, this one here, except the besides the message box, we'll fix that later. One difference I see is this one. As you can see on the left and right hand side, we have a bigger space. It's not like very close to your screen like what you see here. All right, so this is too close. So for example, let's run this one in my app to see how it looks like. So I open my emulator, and I have to kind of change this layout, switch that from the main to the main second one, and then if I start to run my app, all right, so it looks pretty much the same as the video editor. So video editor is actually doing a great job to kind of simulate what the video looks like. So you can come here, you can start to type your email, and then you can have a subject or message and then click on send. But I mentioned it, like when you have this thing super close to the edge of the screen, it doesn't look that nice. Sometimes you need some kind of a space in between. All right. So if you need to do something like that, there are two options you can do. Number one, something called a margin. All right. So let's add some margin. So I can try this. So for the edit text, for example, I want to add something on the left and right so that this view becomes shorter. So how do I do it? So go to edit text. If you type margin, all right. So there are a lot of options. So it all starts with the layout and the layout margin, the margin top, bottom, right, and left. Okay. So you can really specify the margin on all four different directions. up and down, sorry, top and bottom, and left and right. So if I want to add something to the left, I'm going to do margin left. All right. And then if I want to do something for the right, I can do it. When you specify the margin, all right, so I can try a specific value. So for example, I do 10. As you can see, once I add the margin, guys, you can see it, this one actually has a little more space than the other two. All right, I can do the same thing, margin right. Also do 10. Once I add a 10, as you can see, this one also has a little bit margin, shows up. That's what the margin is. Okay, so pretty much gave you an add those space inside between your element and the parent, the container. Okay, so they are not touching each other closely. So I can do the same thing for the other one. So margin left 10, and then margin right 10. So this one also got a little bit more space. All right, so it looks a little bit better. That's how margin works. You can also do margin top and bottom. For example, if I do margin top, I do a 20. Let's see what happens. If I do margin top 20, well, so 20 space has been added at the top, so they're not touching the top of the screen closely. But now you might have a question, so what does this 10 or 20 mean? It'll be what? Pixels, right? Because if you understand how the computer or any screen actually shows all the things, we use the pixels to render the whole content. That's why when you change the different phones, they give you the resolution. Like this one is 1440 by 2080. That means every row you have 1440 pixels, and then the whole screen, the height is composed with 2880 pixels. It's a lot of pixels. The more pixels you have, the clearer your screen is, because you can control the very details, right? So it's a very common way to use pixel to represent the dimension, the size, the length. So if I say 10, I can say, well, give me 10 pixels of margin or space, 20 pixels of margin or space. So that's why you see there's something red here. So the Android Studio, although it can render it, but it's not really happy about this number you put here, because you have not told Android Studio what is the measurement, what is the unit. Are you going to use pixel, or are you going to use something else, right? So if I'm going to use a pixel, I should use this px. All right, so that is pixels. So if you give that unit, then the red is gone. Then you got a good, version here. But then you might be noticed that when I switch this from 10 to 10 px, this margin actually is slightly different. It's actually becoming shorter. All right, let's try that again. So if I do 10, that's what it looks like. But if I do 10px, that's the 10px. There is a margin, but the margin becomes a lot shorter. All right. So with that, I want to talk more about this unit. All right. So pixel, that's often the most, the very straightforward one for us to think about the way to measure the distance, measure the space. Because everyone understands the pixel, I'm just going to count how many pixels I'm going to use. So that works. So if you want more, you can increase this one to 20. You can increase one to 30. So you're going to get more space. But that's, however, not the best way for Android to specify the margin. The problem is, let's maybe try some experiments. Right? So if I do 50, 50, and then 10 here. All right, so let's just watch the left and right. Right now, I'm specifying the 50 pixels. And then remember, this phone right now is pixel phone. All right, so I'm using this one. So the dimension of this phone has 1080, 9020, which is kind of a medium type of level of a phone. Not the best, but not the lowest. So if you specify 50, 50 pixel, maybe this is the one you want. But then the problem is if I'm running your app using a different phone, for example, if I'm running your app using a phone like has a higher resolution, maybe this one, or maybe just use the Pixel one. This one has a higher resolution. Let's see what happens if I switch to this one. All right, and you will actually start to notice that you're still using that amount of a pixel, but the space, the margin specified by that number of pixel is going to be less than the other screen, because this one, the screen itself is wider, but you're still using 50 pixels, and then your margin of percent will look smaller. Or if you change it to like a maybe smaller phone like this one, Nexus S, this is probably a better example you can see. This time the margin is actually a lot more than the other one in terms of percent, right? The reason is because this phone actually is a really poor and old phone, and the pixel pretty very big, and also there are not many pixels. So if you put 50 pixels for the same row here, that's going to take a lot of space. But once you switch to newer phones, it's not going to be that much, because you have more pixels, and also the pixel problem itself also smaller. So that kind of creates a problem for us, which is if you use the hard-coded pixels to measure your margin, and it's not going to be very compatible for all the phones. So you should always keep this compatibility in your mind when you are developing Android app, because you all know that I told you Android is open source. Pretty much today, except iPhone, all the other phones you can use, Samsung, LG, like Xiaomi, if you're familiar with this Chinese company, also pretty big. They have a Huawei phone, they have other phones, and all the other countries. There's so many countries making all different brands, and they all using Android. Because Android is open source, they can pretty much do that for free, and then they can make any changes they want. Well, for Apple, their operating system is closed. You can't reuse it except it's for iPhone. Well, but then it's good that you can have so many options, but then the problem for the developer is there are thousands of phones available. There are thousands of models of phones available. So that creates all these kind of different type of phones, different screen, different resolution, different dimensions. So if you want to write the app, you want to make sure that it works for all the phones. That's actually a very, very challenging task to do. Where for the iPhone, even though it's iPhone 10 right now, but there are only like 10, 15 different models, different screen sizes. So it's much more predictable and more manageable. You can literally just test your app in all possible iPhone models, which is very doable. But for Android, you can't do it. I can tell you there are over 10,000 different phones since the day one of Android. You just can't test in all the phones. So since you know there's such a big variety of models and screens, we highly recommend that you do not use some of these hard-coded values, because if you do, you're going to have these issues, because this 50 pixel is going to give you a totally different experience in different type of phones. All right, the reason is the phone, they have different kind of dimensions, different resolutions. All right. Then you might ask, all right, so if we don't use this, then what else we can do? All right, so there are two better ways to do this. Number one, you can actually use the number, but you do not want to use something called a pixel, because the pixel is really dependent on the phone. You don't want to use something related on the phone. In order to solve that problem, Android provides you a different type of unit. That one is called, instead of a PX, they call it DP. All right. So that's the one you should use. I think it stands for density pixel. Let me check the slides. Okay, density independent pixel. It's still kind of a pixel, but it's a different type of pixel. All right. So it's called a DP. Let's all change it to DP and see what it can do. All right. And once you change to DP, as you can see, since it's a different measurement, a different unit, it means a different length compared with the pixels, so it's wider. So I'm going to change it back to maybe 30 here, and then 30 the other side. All right. Now this density independent pixel means that that pixel is something Android uses itself without being affected by the actual resolution of the screen. In other words, it's a smart kind of pixel. Android will figure out what's your resolution and then figure out the right number of pixels for this new pixel. So Android try to help you to make your app more compatible. So if you use this one, let's see the difference. Okay, if I'm going to use this one, and right now I'm in the Pixel phone. If I go first of all to a higher end phone, Pixel 2, pretty much the same. But then also if we go back to the lower and really cheap phone, it's still something like this. All right. Maybe we can do a comparison. So for example, the second one. All right. So let's do this one like a 50 pixel, 50 pixel. All right. This one is DP. This one is pixel. Let's actually make them as like the same as possible. So it looks like this one I can do a 45. Yeah, 45 is a good one. All right. Take a look at this first two edit tags. This one is using DP. This one is using actual absolute pixel. So when I start to make changes, this one right now in a very cheap phone. Once I switch to a higher end phone, like this one, you can see the space remain the same, but then this one goes off. Because for the higher end phone, the 45 pixel is actually not as wide as in the cheaper phone. So you start to see the difference. And then also if I go to even higher, again, this one you see the percent remains pretty well, but then this one is actually not that good. This one, as you can see, when you put only 45 pixel, it's very close to your screen, edge of the screen. So that's the difference. All right. So in other words, you have all different options to specify the number, but do not use a pixel. You always want to use a DP. You can even use millimeter, inches, that also works, but you're never going to use that. Okay, it's not going to work. You don't want to give the same thing. If you do a millimeter, it's the absolute value. And when you are having a smaller screen, 10 millimeter maybe it's good. But when you have a bigger screen, your 10 millimeter is not enough. So never use those kind of absolute type of unit. You want to use something more smart. This thing called density independent pixel. So anytime if you need a specific number, there's no exception. Always use DP. Because DP is something Android provided for you to help you to figure out the most compatible unit depending on different devices. All right. So if you use DP, it's pretty much guarantee a good, scalable UI for you. All right. So for this one, you should do the same. So let's come back. I'm going to change this a little bit, maybe 10 dp, maybe 15. We'll do more. All right. I'm going to do 15 dps, 15 dp. And then this one same, I give it 20 dp to the top. And then here, same 15 dp. And then same, and here 15 dp. All right. So, and then you can also do the same for the other boxes. So margin left, 15 dp. Right, 15 dp. And for the button, you can do the same. Margin left, 15 dp. Right, 15 dp. All right, so now they have been aligned by adding that margin. So if you start to run your app again, all right, so you got some spaces here. It looks a lot better. So adding the margin is very important when you are making a UI. You don't want everything to be so compact and touch each other. It's not going to look good. You want to have enough spaces and an appropriate amount of space between your widgets and also between your widget and your parent. Okay, that's a very basic UI design rule here. All right, so I talk about this is the way to do the margin. And it can be applied to all 4 different directions. For example, for the middle one here, I want to put some more margin. Maybe for the button, I want this one to be further from the other box, so I can put like a margin top. I want to put a 30 dp. All right, after that you can see there's some space between. And now of course I can also do a, instead of doing a margin top, I can also do a margin bottom. Margin bottom for the text box, I do 30 dp. It does exactly the same thing. So there are different ways you can do it, as long as you understand the direction and value everything. All right. So I'm going to put this one back here. All right. Now, understanding the margin, that's great. Now, the next thing to understand is something called a padding. All right. So let me just show you an example, and then you will see what does the padding do. All right. I'm going to come back to this edit text. All right. I'm going to make this bigger. Once I add the margin, like 15, if I change that to 35, see that one goes, to the right because I'm adding more space here. There is another option called padding. So if I do, let's try this. I'm going to do padding. I'm also going to do the same thing, padding left. I'm also going to input 35 dp. Let's see the difference. 35 dp. Once I added padding left, see the changes. Can you explain? Can anyone explain what's the difference between padding and margin? Yes.
Margin kind of like almost like what contains or the packaging. Like
right.
I use this. You have your containing this in this space, like kind of like that.
Right. Exactly. More examples. Okay, so I showed you. Let's see button. When I do, I showed you the margin top, 20 dp. As you got a space. But if I do padding top, 20 dp, what happens? Right? You got the idea. Okay. Once you try it, you will see the difference. Margin is the space between the element and the parent. Yes, it's actually the parent. And the padding is the space inside your element. Okay, so that's the only difference between the two. One is outside, one is inside. Margin is talking about outside, the other one is inside. That's why for this button, when you try to add some paddings, you're going to adding more space inside the button between the button and your text. And then this one the same. You're going to start to type right here instead of in the very beginning because you add some paddings. If I want to do more, 50 padding, and then it moves here. So when you start to type, it will start to show up here. Like that's how you start. All right. Padding controls the inside, margin controls outside. So you will need to use both. All right. Whenever you want to add like more space along the border, everything most likely it's going to be the margin. But when you start to control the text, everything, in many cases you have to add paddings. All right. So let's come back and I'm going to get rid of this. So this one come back to 15. Padding. All right, don't need it. All right, that's another thing. All right, the margin and padding. Let me see what else. But again, when you are specifying this, one more time, use a DP. Okay, that's a rule. Very simple. Don't worry, there are so many options. You only need to use DP. And this one shows the same thing, that when you have, the same amount of information, and then when you are using different dimensions, this is what happens when you do pixel, DP, and ASCII. We'll talk more about what ASCII is. But then, as you can see, this middle one, the DP one, even though you're using different sizes of string, it almost remains the same. Because Android will know the device type, will know the device information, so Android actually can calculate that kind of information for you, so it will convert that DP into the right amount of pixels for you to use in order to keep them the same. So Android actually doesn't work with DP, very smart. But you see the other ones, those ones look pretty small, but then here it's a lot bigger. All right. All right. Any questions so far? So one more important thing, which is about the gravity. All right. So I already showed you how that works. But let's take a look at this again. So when we are talking about all these views, now in many cases we have to center them, we have to put them to the left or right, top and bottom. Whenever you need to do those, you need to think about gravity. Pretty easy to understand. Gravity is just like your physical gravity. It can drop, it can go anywhere. But then you can specify gravity for not just in the bottom, but also you go to top, go to center, things like that, to try to fix a position. What would be a good example? Let's see that I want to do like button. All right. Now I want this button to be center. So to do that, I need to use something called layout gravity. Right, so let's try this. When I type gravity, there are two options. One is gravity, one is layout gravity. We'll talk about compare what's the difference. But right now, I'm going to start with layout gravity. The most commonly one is the center. If I do center, all right, so that centers my element inside my parent. All right, and my parent is that linear layout. I'm going to basically center myself in that same row. So when you use layout gravity, it actually helps you to put the element to the certain direction, certain areas easily. And then I believe you can also do like a left or right. Yes. And also the similar way is to start or end. Oh, it's pretty much the same. I forgot which one comes later because there may be a standard one for you to use. I guess it's start and end. But pretty much three options: start, end, and then center. All right. So this is called layout gravity. So I'm going to put it to the right. If you remember the design we had earlier, we want to put the button right here. All right. So that's what we want to do. All right. That's layout gravity. And the same thing, let's try something else. Let's try, we can't really try this once. For example, if I change one of this to be shorter, so wrapped content, right, so that's the message, I can do the same thing. Layout gravity, center, okay, that's going to be the message. And then I can go right, and that also goes there. But when I put this one to be match parents, then it doesn't matter because it's going to take the whole screen. All right. So that is layout gravity. Anytime you want to put your stuff in the middle somewhere, think about layout gravity. But remember, layout gravity only works with linear layout. If this button is not inside the linear layout, then you don't have this. All right, it doesn't work. Now, once you understand the linear layout gravity, let's talk about the gravity. So let's, again, use the button as an example. This time I'm going to use the gravity. Again, you have all of this, center, right, left, all these options. When I do a center, nothing happens. All right. But once I show you one more example, you will see what that's gravity means. So once I do also a right, all right, you see the changes. When I put the gravity of the button to be right, that's what it looks like. When I put that to be the left, that's what it looks like. But if I change the layout gravity to be left, that's what has been changed. So what's the difference? Same, inside and outside. Gravity controls the inside content. Layout gravity controls the element itself relative to the parent. Same. All right, so you do both. For button, you rarely use gravity because most of the time we need to do that center. Okay, so you don't change this. But for all of the other things, it's very useful. For example, the edit text, that will be a good example. So for example, if you always want to show the subject, let's say subject, or I want to show this one, the text to be the center. All right, so I can do a gravity. I can put that to be a center. And you can, whatever you type will all be centered. Even though you have the whole space, but it's always going to start from the center. So let me run this for you. For the subject, whatever type is going to come from the center. All right. So anything inside, you want to align those. So you use gravity. All right. And I think that's it. All right, we're almost done with this. Before I move on to the next one, I want to talk a little bit more. In many cases, for the same kind of a layout design, you always have all different ways to do the same thing. So everything I showed you is just one kind of example to achieve the design. Just like I told you, you can do margin top or margin bottom, depending on which one you apply that margin. So there is no standard answer for the same kind of design. As long as you can make the design happen, more importantly, as long as you can guarantee your design is scalable, is compatible, then you are implementing a good design. So it doesn't matter what approach you're using. For example, another case here, I showed you how do we add all these margins, right? 15 for all of them, 15 here, 15 here, 15 here, 15 here. This one works, but then the problem is if I want to change this one into a little bit bigger, for example, 20. Now I need to go to every single margin here to change the 20, 20. All right, which is kind of tedious. What's a better way to do this? Sorry? Parent, yeah. So I can apply the margin to the parent in exactly the same way. All right, so let's try that. For the parent linear layout, I can also do margin left. I'm going to add another 20 dp. As you can see, now the parent also has a margin between itself and the parent, which is the script. So, but it does exactly the same thing. You can also add margin right, 20 dp. All right, so you got another extra 20 dp here. So that will be a lot easier. All right, and the same thing for the padding. So you can also add a padding for your inside your parent. So you can do a padding. Let's this time try top. I can do a 50 dp. All right, as you can see, inside your layout, then there is a space here called padding top. You add a 50 dp, and then the rest of things will be moved to the bottom. All right, so don't forget that you can actually specify a lot of things for your parent, for your container. That will make everything a lot simpler in many cases. All right, so with that, I'm going to delete some of this because that's not really easy to manage. All right. And then another thing, speaking of that layout, gravity. So if I start to apply the gravity to my layout, then things are going to also make some interesting changes. So for example, I want to make everything inside gravity to be centered. So if I can go here and then do a gravity for my parent linear layout, if I do a center, as you can see, that is the effect. So everything will be centered to the screen. Because you're saying that I want a gravity for all your content, which are all these little elements, for them to be centered. That's what you can get. Remember, this is what we did for that quiz app example. We did a gravity centered for the parent. All right. So this kind of whole UI design needs a lot of experience. But it's not really hard to learn. After a few examples, you will get some of the common ways to specify the layout and stuff. All right. Very good. Now the last point about linear layout, which is very, very important. All right, so you have to learn this one very well because it can give you a very flexible way to specify your layout. So we're trying to solve this problem again, this message box. All right, I showed you if I simply do for the height match parent, it's going to like eat the whole space and then I can't really see my button. Right, so I'm going to run my app. I can't find a button because this one tried to match the parent. And then this space has already been taken and this one, it just used all available space. That's not what I want. I really want something that you gave me that enough for my button and then you take the rest. All right, so two ways I can do. One is instead of match parent, for the width and the height I didn't tell you, but you can also specify a number. So for example, for the height, well, let's just do 200 dp. If I do 200 dp, that's kind of the space. Well, that's not enough. I'm going to do 400 dp. Too much. I'm going to do 380. All right, still not good. 350. Well, that looks like a pretty good result. All right, so for the button, I want to put it to the right. This one looks pretty similar to the design we have. At least, more looks better now. But then when you specify the height with this DP, then you're still going to face that problem. Even though Android taking care of the space, but then if your phone, the screen is much smaller or much bigger, you're going to have that issue again. So for example, if we go back to try, let's say some of the older phones like this one here, you see, even though Android try to scale that pixel, I still use all the space because that's 350 is too much. The older screen doesn't have that much space, so they can't do it. Or another interesting, if you want to do like I remember you can also do smartwatch. Like this one here, you can even simulate a square watch if you do this. All right, so that's the little screen for if you develop your app to run on a watch. And there's no way you can put a 350 dp for your message box, no matter how they scale this. Or if you try TV, all right, which is fun, but still, as you can see, this space is too much. So that actually tells us you should never use a specific value for width and height. You can use for margin and padding. The reason is because normally you're not going to have a big number for margin and padding. So that is fine. But if you do the dimension for the width and the height, you do not want to use this, even using DP, because it doesn't scale. At the end, you really want to make sure your implementation of the UI is scalable, is compatible. Otherwise, you're going to have so much issue once you publish your app to Android, because you never know what kind of phone people are using. All right, so never do the height with a concrete value. So let me come back to the phone here. And this one works for this phone, but it's not compatible. So I'm going to drop this approach. So what should I do? Fortunately, linear layout gave you a very powerful way to specify this. Because all we want really is some kind of percent. All right, so if I can specify, well, this box takes, let's say 60% of the screen, and then I don't care about your size of the screen, you just give me 60%. That's actually a much better way to specify. All right, so that brings the next topic, which is the weight. Right. So in the linear layout, this is the most powerful part about linear layout. You can specify the weight for each element contained in that linear layout. And based on the weight, we're going to split the space by the weight assigned to you. All right, so for example, right now, here, by default, we don't really specify the weight because just do the automatic space for it. But then if you specify this one as 110, that means these two are going to share the same amount of space. Where the third one, we don't give you anything, but just make sure that you have enough. This one is 1, 1, 2. That means this one takes 25%, 25%. This one got 50%. The way the Android handling the weight is, it doesn't care about the number. Like you don't have to do like 100%. Like then you give 25, 25, 50. You can do that, but you don't have to do that. You can also do 1, 1, 2 as long as the ratio is the same. You're good. So let me show you the example. All right. So for this example, I want, for example, the first one. This one maybe only take 10% of the screen. So I'm gonna do a weight here. Layout weight. I do a 10%. And then the second one, I'm also gonna do a 10%. And then the third one, I will take 70%. And then the last button, also take 10%. All right. Now as you can see, it looks a lot different because I use exactly the percent to specify this. The nice part about doing this is always going to keep that ratio. For example, if I go back to the older phone, it still works, just the same ratio. I go to a better phone, it also works. Or I go to watch, it still works. Very nice. All right, because I try to keep that ratio. All right, so that's how the weight works. But I told you, you don't have to do like 10, 10, 70, 10 to make it 100. You can just do like 1, 1, 7, 1, the same. The ratio is the same. It doesn't care. As long as you specify the ratio, that works. All right. Now, one thing very, very special here, you really have to remember this, okay? Once you start to use the weight, now you have to make one more change for the actual width or height. Since we're in a vertical, we're in a vertical arrangement, a vertical layout, using the linear layout. Once you specify the weight, you are basically telling how you want to specify the height. The weight in this case only affects the height because everything is aligned vertically, right? So at this case, once you apply the weight, you have to change the original height. Previously, we were using wrap content, but if you have a weight to do it, we don't want to do that anymore because that's going to create some conflicts. So how should I do the height? You have to change it back to 0 dp. All right. Don't ask me why, because the 0 dp is a very special value here in Android. It basically tells you in Android that please discard this value. I want to use the weight. And remember, if you don't do this, sometimes you're going to see very weird layout. Even though you give the right weight, but if you don't put that back to be 0, it's going to cause some problem for you. So I'm going to change everything here back to 0 dp. All right. It doesn't change much, but that one gives the most accurate layout based on the weight. This is required. Okay, don't forget about this one because if you don't change the height back to 0 dp, your weight doesn't work perfectly. All right. So right now it's 10% each, and then the message box takes 70%. Or another way to do this is, well, I don't really need the other one to be that 10%. I just care about this one to take the whole space available. Well, the other one just have enough for them. You can also do that. So the way to do this one, I think if you change the weight back to 0, and then this one, well, you have to change it back to wrap content. That means that I don't want to use the weight. All right, I just want to wrap the content. This one use the weight. Well, 7, since nobody else are using weight, you're basically 100% available. So you're going to use whatever available for you. All right, so or you don't have to put the weight. You can just delete the weight if it's 0, and just use wrap content. So this is the very typical way to do the layout. You specify something to let it take care of the whole space. The rest use wrap content to get whatever they need. All right, that's how the layout works. Linear layout works. Weight is very powerful. All right, because when you do this again, when you change different screen, let me change back to TV, it still works. All right, the message box body takes most of the space, and then the rest got enough. All right, back to the phone. And one more thing for the message. If you look at my design, the message should start from the top. Right now, it starts from the middle. Which one should I change from the message box? How can I make the message to the top? Gravity, right? You want to change the inside content, that is called gravity. You can try something like either top, yeah, that works. Just play around with it. I can't remember all of it. Sometimes you try different one just to see which one works. If you still can't find answer, don't ask me, ask Google. All right. I can guarantee for Android, it's a UI. Anything you want, put it into Google. You find the correct answer from Stack Overflow right away. All right, because most of the problems you're going to have in the beginning are very common problems. And why my weight not working? Because that's 0 DP. Okay, all of them try to Google it. You can find the answer very, very quickly. All right. So that kind of gave us the design. And then this margin is too much. I'm not going to do that much. All right. And then, yeah. So that's how the linear layout works. We can also change this one to horizontal. If I change the horizontal, no, we have to do different things. But for the horizontal kind of a linear layout, you can do the same thing by giving the weight, having the percent, and then it works exactly the same thing. The only difference, you're sharing the whole space in the same row rather than the whole screen here. All right. So that is linear layout. Any questions so far? So as you can see, linear layout has a lot of properties, but the one I told you, that's pretty much the only thing you need. All right. Width and height, margin and padding, gravity, layout gravity, and weight. And also we talk about the DP as the best way to the unit to use. All right. Let's how about we take a break? We'll come back to talk about the other layout called relative layout. All right.